Today we're going to be talking about the intricate relationship between disability, poverty, and education. First, let's look at disability and what it is and how it functions as a concept within our society. Susan Wendell describes disability as socially constructed through the failure or unwillingness to create ability among people who do not fit the physical and mental profile of paradigm citizens. This is manifested in many various ways, such as a building not having a wheelchair ramp, or public parks that are not handicap accessible for young disabled children. The inadequacy of policies and social support prolongs as well as creates disability. This slide shows different models of disability, whether it be the medical or social model, and how they negatively impact someone living with a disability. Let's think about how the outspoken misunderstanding perceptions from able-bodied people affect disabled, impoverished students and their academic performance. The flowchart on the right exemplifies how disability and poverty are an intersectionality and sort of feed off of one another, which we'll get into more later. We also need to define ableism in order to understand the concept of disability. As John Jones said, ableism is systemic oppression of a group of people based on what they can or can't do with their bodies or with their minds. From the cartoon characters on this slide, we see that ableism is often voiced in inappropriate questions posed to people with disabilities like, can you even have sex? Or may be seen in online websites and apps not having voiceover options for those with hearing disabilities. Ableism is a form of discrimination that believes people with disabilities need to be fixed in order to fit into these tight constraints of society. Typically, with poverty in education, students actually living in poverty are often labeled as lazy or unmotivated by teachers and administrators through a deficit ideology perspective. This deficit ideology blames the student or family for failing educational results rather than looking at the system and its faults. In contrast, a structural ideology acknowledges the faults of the school system or society in general and looks at the bigger picture. A student may be falling asleep in class because he or she had to work a late shift to help with the bills, not because they're uninterested in the subject. This question from Paul Gorski can help educators self-evaluate when it comes to their perceptions of students living in poverty and could even also be applied to students with disabilities. Or it could be applied to the intersection of these two things, which again we'll discuss in a minute. Now we'll look at some of the laws and policies surrounding special education and how it impacts students living in poverty with disabilities. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, is the guiding federal legislation for disability in education. While it does represent and protect the equity of education for disabled students, many who fall in a poverty threshold, reform is needed. Research shows that many students are wrongly identified for SPED, while others don't fit the federal requirements, which need to be redefined to be more inclusive so that these students can get the support they need. This flowchart walks us through the identification and placement process of a student who may be eligible for protection under IDEA. So circling back to intersectionality, it's important to identify how disabled students living in poverty are affected by the current educational climate. Research shows that low-income students were more likely to be identified for SPED and then subsequently placed in substantially separate classrooms, essentially meaning they're placed in a different part of the school from general education classrooms. Because of this, it's important to ask, why are these low-income students being identified? Are there others that aren't being identified and struggling because of the insufficient federal requirements for IDEA? Here we'll break out and answer some of these questions and discuss the presentation in small groups. So in groups, look at these questions and answer them or discuss anything that is confusing or sticking out from the presentation. And here's the question and answer portion of the day. So thank you so much for your attention and have a great day.